What makes your life worth living? It's a given that at some point in your life you're going to ask yourself this question, but how many of us have left it unanswered? That answer is a difficult thing to come up with, really. Your choices are both endless and nigh impossible to settle upon. All around you, people seem to have their own contradictory conclusion to this question, and they all simultaneously claim theirs is the right one. So what do you do? I believe that according to Peter Weir's Dead Poets Society, the answer to what makes life worth living is this: beauty. You might hear that and immediately think of something vain, probably physical beauty, our ephemeral features, the surface-level attractiveness of another person. But that's not the meaning I'm trying to evoke. I mean a beautiful painting, a beautiful sunset, a beautiful piece of music, or, in this case, a beautiful film. I was 14 when I first watched Dead Poets Society with my father. The film almost guaranteed a degree of relatability. After all, I was watching boys not much older than I was going through the same period of life as me. The hours passed, and eventually the credits rolled. Tears threatened to break through my eyes and roll down my cheeks, but in my desire to appear strong, I held them back as much as a young teenager could. It was when my father told me something I've carried with me ever since that I failed to keep those tears at bay. But to understand why, let's meet our protagonists. Who the actual main character of Dead Poets Society is remains a debated topic, so I'll make it easy for us and simply call it an ensemble cast. Our dead poets in question are Neil, Todd, Knox, Charlie, and Cameron. While there are other members of the club, these five generally take the spotlight with a special focus on these three. Neil is immediately introduced with association to his domineering and rigid father. The man is incredibly insistent that Neil becomes a doctor, so even something as small as his interest in becoming an editor for the school paper is shot down. After all, nothing should distract him from his studies for the job that his dad wants him to have. Neil acquiesces to these demands, willing to set aside his interests for the whims of his father. Somewhat similarly, Todd lives in the shadow of his brother, a graduate of Welton and one of their most decorated alumni. This is also made quickly apparent when it's the first thing the headmaster says to him when they meet.
Mr. Anderson, you have some big shoes to fill, young man. Your brother was one of our finest.
Todd's insecurity with living up to the expectations set by his older brother becomes one of his main hurdles to overcome throughout the film, as this lifelong treatment, like the headmaster's, has left him shy and timid, unwilling to speak up because his life has enforced a lack of confidence. Knox is our hopeless romantic, smitten by a cheerleader, who unfortunately is already taken. Charlie is the quintessential class clown, taking almost no part of life seriously. And Cameron is the opposite, someone who is doing everything by the book and always adhering to authority. While they have their individual quirks, every one of these boys is subject to the expectations of Welton, the prestigious boarding school that they all attend, epitomized by the school's four pillars: tradition, honor, discipline, and excellence. While these are certainly noble ideas on paper, the practice of the school is to enforce the unbending boredom of rigidity. Students are expected to behave in exactly the same way and to do everything in accordance with how the rules tell them to. Weir pointedly demonstrates this with an excellent series of scenes displaying the classrooms of a variety of subjects. Though they are all teaching different things, they're unified by their monotone, repetitive, and horribly impersonal personas. Classes are staunch and unforgiving, and perhaps most terrible of all, boring. In many ways, they are the end result of the philosophy being drilled into these boys. Encapsulating this is the headmaster, an older man who once taught English at the school he now oversees. His role in keeping the students on a leash is a recurring theme as the film progresses. All this is flipped on its head when an ambassador of change comes into class, Mr. Keating. Played with all the charm that Robin Williams can muster, which is quite a lot, Mr. Keating immediately makes his mark on the class with his style of teaching. In contrast to the fixed and stiff style of teaching present in so many of the other classes, Keating introduces unorthodox lesson styles to the boys. In fact, he prefers not to be called Mr. Keating at all.
Now in this class, you can either call me Mr. Keating, or if you're slightly more daring, oh Captain, my Captain.
For one, his first lesson isn't even about English. He waltzes into class only to walk to the other end of the room and out the door, inviting the boys to follow along as if it's the most obvious thing in the world for them to do. As they travel down the storied halls of Welton, he leads them to a trophy case showing off pictures of boys from days past. Here he confers upon the boys, and likewise the audience, one of the most important parts of the film.
The Latin term for that sentiment is carpe diem. Seize the day. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. Because we are food for worms, lads. Because believe it or not, each and every one of us in this room is one day going to stop breathing, turn cold, and die.
He uses the pictures of the boys of the past as a source of inspiration for the boys of the present. This fills each of them with a new sense of wonder. It's a meta lesson of sorts, something that is applicable to their entire lives. It forces them to question their current trajectory, and the sort of false dichotomy that they've lived under while attending the school. Welton only gives you so many options. A career path, likely something in business, law, or medicine. But this lesson from Mr. Keating provides them with something else to achieve. He expands upon this idea in another one of his lessons.
Medicine, law, business, engineering, these are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for.
They've been so conditioned into the former, the part of life that is practically just pure survival, and have not at all been given the opportunity to consider those aspects that actually make mere survival a worthwhile endeavor. Using it as a microcosm, the introduction of their poetry textbook describes a very scientific and logical means of evaluating poetry. Keating has them rip this page out entirely, admonishing the idea that one can so systematically go about experiencing art. This is a smaller example of the greater lesson he wants to teach them, to reject the stricter paths that have been laid out for them, and to challenge the boys to think for themselves. Obviously, this gets the boys incredibly curious about Mr. Keating's past. He's already told them that he's an alumni of the school, and so they dig through old yearbooks to discover he once belonged to a special organization, the titular Dead Poets Society. Prodding him for answers on this mysterious group, Keating reminisces and subtly points them in the direction of resurrecting the club once more.
We're in a Greek organization. We were romantics. We didn't just read poetry. We let it drip from our tongues like honey. Not a bad way to spend an evening, eh?
While Keating's direct teaching does quite a lot for them, it's this decision to venture out and experience the art for themselves that sends them down the path of true growth. Each boy has a different reaction to Keating's teaching, and to their experience in art. Cameron remains the most resistant, but is still willing to venture out and explore his own artistic side. Charlie takes the idea of poetry in stride, treating it with a similar joviality to his regular silliness, but being authentic in doing so. He embraces a sort of trickster spirit, taking on a poet name.
Call me Nwanda.
And being bombastic in his delivery. He further convinces some girls to join in their poetry, wooing them with the charm of his art. Knox is, as previously mentioned, the one that takes most to the romantic potential of poetry. When the class is asked to create their own poems, his is a simple one about love. This elegant simplicity is in many ways representative of the process that we all go through of coming to more deeply understand love as an emotion when we grow up. Given the age of all these boys and the major growth that comes along with this time in our lives, it's apt that Knox's main point of maturity is his journey from simplistic to complex feelings of love, all communicated through his poetry. Having developed a fancy for Chris, she becomes his muse. Like so many romantics before him, Knox is filled with the drive to confess his love to her and to express his intense emotions through his poetry. It's Todd who takes the longest to come into himself as an artist, as his shyness gets in the way of him reading during their sessions. Neil, however, remains staunchly supportive of him, encouraging him to both participate in the club and to claim a general sense of confidence in his life. Todd's really just waiting to find the courage to say all of the things that are already inside of him, exemplified through Mr. Keating making him recite a poem on the fly.
Push it, stretch it, it'll never be enough. You kick at it, beat it, it'll never cover any of us. From the moment we enter crying to the moment we leave dying, it'll just cover your face as you wail and cry and scream.
It's Neil who runs into the biggest conflict with his newfound artistry. The powerful creative spirit inside him that's been denied since the beginning of the film by his father begins to flourish, and his reading of poetry pushes him towards auditioning for a play in pursuit of becoming an actor. Of course, this is in complete opposition to what his father wants, and so he must keep it a secret. Each of these boys has found a new sense of meaning in their life, facilitated through the beauty of poetry. It's unlocked for them new pursuits that are in that latter category of life that Mr. Keating talked about, the things that actually make living worthwhile. Art, romance, self-actualization. The boys have broken free from the chains of their skewed expectations and are now seizing their respective days. Tragically, the bliss of their transformation into artists only lasts so long. Despite his best efforts, Neil's father eventually discovers his role in the play, and he comes to see it. Neil gives an excellent performance, something his friends and Mr. Keating are wildly proud of, but his dad is furious. Not only does he have Neil taken away from his artistic endeavors, but from Welton as a whole. This leaves Neil absolutely hopeless. He's finally discovered the beauty of life, his reason for really, truly living, and once more his father has dragged his leash to choke him back into the submission of the life that he wants Neil to live, not the life that Neil wants. Neil is bombarded with overwhelming grief and hopelessness. He believes that he will forever be a prisoner of his father's wishes, forever looking through his barred windows at what could have been a beautiful life worthy of being lived. Unable to face this horrid life, he makes the drastic decision to end it. This is a harrowing moment. The scene is singed into my memory and my heart. An unfortunate amount of people, including myself, have had someone in their life commit suicide, and even those that haven't will still have their guts wrenched. It's a difficult thing, even in fiction, to watch a young man fall into such despair that he would take his own life, and in an absolutely heartbreaking scene, we watch his parents weep over the actions of their son. It's equally as gut-wrenching when his friends hear what's happened, especially Todd. They can do nothing but their best to comfort each other against the impossibly tragic situation, their only consolation being their shared grief. Worse, Neil's father is unwilling to take personal responsibility, and so he blames the school and specifically Mr. Keating for Neil's decision. He believes that the teacher's inspiration to resurrect the Dead Poets Society is what led to Neil's death. The boys get put in a difficult position. Do they choose their personal safety at the cost of Mr. Keating getting fired, or do they stick to their newly found values and remain resolute? Charlie, against all the odds of his goofball nature, had already refused to give up his fellow poets and was beaten for it. So, when Cameron reveals that he named the other members and encourages them all to let Keating fry, Charlie punches him, resulting in Charlie's own expulsion. It's Todd, the most quiet and meek of the group, that has the true final stand. In this ultimate and infamous moment in the movie, he overcomes his fear and inspires his fellow students to properly send Mr. Keating off and defy everything the school stands for.
Captain, my captain.
Sit down, Mr. Anderson. You hear me?
So, how does this last act of the movie convey the idea that beauty is the point of life? Knox's beauty is romance. By going so far and so fully into his confession and pursuit, he discovers love as both his life's meaning and the key to his artistic soul. In the end, he's successful, as Chris's previous boyfriend is comparatively not so in touch with his own sense of beauty. Knox's value of the relationship exists at a higher level than his, and so Chris rejects one for the other in a fulfillment of romance. The climax of his story, in many ways, is the final poem that he reads to her, one far more complex and beautifully worded than his initial one, as a way to demonstrate the evolution of his feelings. We all know that sensation of young love, and likewise how, as our brains and hearts grow, so does our understanding of it. Charlie's beauty is the jovial part of life now balanced with an equal responsibility. To be someone that introduces laughter and joy to their friends' lives is a wonderful thing, and fun is a quintessential part of what makes life such a great experience. He fully embraces and epitomizes this aspect of our existence, while maturing into someone that puts his moral values over his own personal survival. Neil's beauty is art. Poetry, film, books, paintings. There are many implementations of art, all of which enhance and beautify our time on Earth. It's the expression of our souls, a profound and authentic evidence of our existence. Because beauty is the point of life, Neil's inability to have it is what leads to his decision to end his own. Todd's is the beauty of self-actualization. The ability to find oneself and to rise from a weight that's been placed upon them is a quintessential part of life and something that cascades upon every other aspect of living. His final defiance and ascension from meek follower to impassioned leader demonstrates just how far he's come. You'll recall that I mentioned my father said something incredibly meaningful to me at the end of the movie when we first watched it together. And it was about Neil's father. I will never be him. As someone with artistic aspirations, there was little more that could have been so overwhelmingly reassuring and loving to hear. Because beyond our duty to ourselves to find the beauty in life, we likewise have that responsibility to ensure others find it too. Our children, our friends, our students, our strangers. Beauty is ubiquitous, and everyone is deserving of discovering it for themselves. So take that wonderful phrase, carpe diem, to heart. Seize the day. Find the beauty. Live. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a like, and you might also enjoy the videos that are on screen right now. Thanks, and have a happy birthday.